Hello everyone, it's great to be back after a little break that I've just had. It's been about a month or so since I completed case number 5, but now I am back and this channel is going to be better than ever. It's definitely a new era for this channel. I'm going to be posting a lot more often. I'm going to be more consistent, or at least try to be more consistent with my uploads. I will be posting on social media and everything else a lot more, so stay tuned for all of that. If you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and click on the button and the notifications, of course. Go follow me on Twitter and on Instagram, as I will be posting a lot more often on both of those social media sites as well. Thank you all again for your patience. I hated to have this break, but it was definitely necessary. But anyway, yes, I am back, and I am back with a two-parter case this time. Today we will be discussing probably one of the most prolific missing persons case of all time. I personally have been hearing about this case literally my entire life. This year has marked the 40th year anniversary of this case, and still it pains me to say that this case is still unsolved and no one knows what happened to this young 12-year-old boy. There are so many videos on this case. There's documentaries, news reports, you name it, it's there. So many ways to research this case. There's so many YouTubers that have already covered this case that I truly admire and respect. So hopefully I do it justice as well as Johnny Gosch does deserve. You guys know, as always, I will be adding my disclaimer page up now, as I do with all my videos. I will be discussing very serious and sometimes upsetting topics, and this is regarding a child. There's going to be a lot of talk about pedophilic rings and things of that nature. So if you don't want to hear about this case, please go ahead and click out of the video. I am not here talking about these cases to upset anyone. I'm here to provide factual information to the best of my ability. I'm here to spread awareness and to hopefully teach people on real life situations that happen every single day. If you are a true crime fanatic, then without a doubt, you have heard about this case. We are going to be talking about the unsolved missing persons case of Johnny Gosch. So let's go ahead and get into it. John David Gosch, known to the world as Johnny, was born on November 12, 1969 in Des Moines, Iowa, to his parents John Gosch Sr. and Noreen Gosch. He is Noreen's youngest child. She had also had 2 children from her previous first marriage, and he was several years younger than both of his siblings, so it was mainly just Noreen and John in the house with him as he grew. He grew up having a very average upper middle class life in Des Moines. He is described by his mother, Noreen, as a very friendly, upbeat, and fun boy. He was kind, good-hearted, and he always wanted to help others. He is described as charming, determined, and responsible. He enjoyed being outdoors. He loved listening to music, being outside riding his dirt bike. He actually did enjoy playing the drums as well. Johnny played football, and he had just started his 7th grade year at Indian Hills Junior High School. Johnny Gosch, in his parents' eyes and to everyone who knew him as a person, was a very wonderful and nice boy, and he was generally very well liked by his peers. He definitely had his entire life ahead of him. As soon as he was old enough, he began working as one of the local paperboys, delivering newspapers to his neighborhood. He actually originally started delivering these newspapers as a way to earn himself money to buy himself his dirt bike. He continued delivering these papers for about 13 months. He would wake up before the sun was out each Sunday morning to complete his paper route, and his parents did not want him to do this alone at all, since he had to be up when it was still dark outside. Noreen specifically was very uncomfortable with the idea of him doing this by himself. Johnny would always wake up one of his parents to join him for this paper route. Typically, he would wake up his father, John. But Johnny, at this point, he was a 12-year-old boy. He was turning 13 in a couple of months, and as a lot of boys his age, he wanted to be more independent. According to Noreen, the night before Johnny disappeared, she remembers that her older daughter and her fiance at the time had come over for a family dinner, And pretty much immediately after this dinner, Johnny announced that he was going to go ahead and get ready for bed, as he knew he needed to be up early the next morning to complete his paper route. As he was leaving and heading upstairs, he told Noreen that he believed that he was ready to do this paper route by himself. And Noreen immediately dismissed this. She declined this scenario very quickly. She reminded Johnny that their agreement for him to be able to do this paper route was if one of his parents were out there with him during his run. It was not debatable for Noreen at all. Johnny then just gave up. He did the, "Oh, okay, Mom," and that was the end of the conversation, and he went off to bed. So that brings us to the day of Johnny Gosch's disappearance. It was early morning, Sunday, September 5th, 1982. Johnny woke up at the crack of dawn, believed to be around 5:45 or so in the morning. Still very dark outside, but this morning, Johnny did not listen to his mother Noreen's directions. He did not wake up his father that morning like he was supposed to. Johnny seemed to have something to prove to his parents, so he left his home address of 1004 45th Street with his red wooden newspaper wagon and the family dog dachshund named Gretchen. Several eyewitnesses will see Johnny as he makes his journey to pick up the newspapers at the Ashworth Road at approximately 5:55 a.m. The Gosch's neighbor heard and saw Johnny walk through his grass, and he definitely heard Johnny and his wagon because at the time his wagon, one of the wheels was squeaking, so that's how they knew definitely that it was Johnny that went through his grass at this time. Johnny continued to walk the few blocks and made it to Ashworth Road to the corner of the church where the boys would pick up their bundles for the route for the day. And already a few paper boys were gathering to the paper drop location. And all of a sudden, a man in a blue car pulls up to Johnny on the street as he was making his way towards the drop box, and he asks Johnny for directions to some street, and it's different street names whenever you look at a different article, of course, but he initially just asked for directions to a street that was blocks away, which was weird that he wanted directions so far away from a 12-year-old boy. During this interaction, the other paper boys witnessed it. But according to the boys that witnessed this interaction, Johnny didn't just stop. He continued to walk and was giving this man directions the best that he could. Johnny finally made it to the drop box with the other boys. This man in his vehicle decides to make a U-turn towards these boys, stops the car, and now he's asking all of these boys for directions. At this point, Johnny does make it clear that this man is making him feel very uneasy. All these boys noticed that this man was acting very weird. He was apparently slurring his words as if maybe he had some sort of speech impediment or possibly intoxicated or even high. Johnny tells one of the older paper boys named Mike, who was around 16 years old at the time, that this man seems very weird. Mike then sees that Johnny has become very nervous, and he tells Mike that he was feeling very uncomfortable. He was just going to go ahead and head home. And so he began to walk back down the street with his wagon, and as Johnny started to walk more and more away, the man then suddenly gets back into his car. He closes the doors, and he flicks the car's dome lights on and off 3 times, and then he speeds away, which is so weird. I couldn't imagine being one of those boys just seeing this. Super weird. If I would have seen someone flick the dome lights on and off, I would have immediately thought that he was trying to get someone's attention. That's just my opinion. So after this car speeds off, apparently another tall man seemingly comes out of nowhere between 2 houses on the street, and then he starts walking towards the direction of Johnny Gosch. And that was the last time that these paper boys saw Johnny. A little while later, at this point it was roughly around 6 a.m. in the morning, Johnny is seen again by a different neighbor who also notices a car near Johnny. Minutes later, the same neighbor heard a car door slam. The neighbor then looks outside and sees a car speeding away like a bat out of hell. And this is really the last known confirmed sighting of Johnny. Within minutes, it seems like this strange interaction with this guy in this blue car, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch, vanished without a trace. So it's a little later now. It's approximately 7:45 in the morning. Johnny's parents, John and Noreen, begin to receive phone calls from upset neighbors informing them that they did not receive their paper that morning. And both of his parents immediately thought that this was very odd because Johnny took his paper route very seriously. He never missed one of his deliveries in the entire 13 months. He was never late. They, of course, first they checked his room. He was not there. Then, probably a little while later, Noreen and John got even more scared when Gretchen, the family's dachshund, had returned to the home on her own without Johnny. When Johnny's parents realized Gretchen returned home without Johnny, and there was no way on earth Johnny would have left Gretchen alone. This definitely freaked out Noreen and John. John then left the house and began to search the neighborhood for Johnny. And very quickly, John found Johnny's red wagon, and it was still full of newspaper bundles, and it was left abandoned near the 42nd Street. All the papers had been accounted for. Johnny Gosch did not even get to deliver one of his newspapers on his route before he disappeared that morning. At this point, John did not call the police yet. Maybe he figured that Johnny did leave the wagon for whatever reason, and maybe he just didn't want to jump to conclusions and contact the police yet. But this part seems a little weird to me. He then decides to take the newspaper wagon and he delivers all of the newspapers to their appropriate homes himself. And I guess as he was delivering the papers, he was also, of course, I'm sure he was also calling out for Johnny and trying to find him as well. But I do think it's a little strange that he, is just seeing all these red flags and he just doesn't immediately say, screw the papers, I need to look for my son. He does deliver all the papers. So with no luck finding Johnny, the Gosch family then does contact the police to report their son missing at approximately 8:30 a.m. At the time of his disappearance, Johnny is believed to have been wearing a white sweatshirt with Kim's Academy written on the back. He was wearing warm-up pants, blue flip-flops, and he was also carrying a yellow paper bag that he used to carry the newspapers when he delivered them. He had brown hair, blue eyes. He was approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, and he weighed approximately 140 pounds. After the police were called, the police took their time to arrive at the Gosch's home following the phone call. According to Noreen, and I've seen several interviews with her saying this, and each time she describes this, when she contacted the police, she always says that the police took at least 45 minutes to get to their home, which I gotta stop for a second. I think it's so ridiculous when people call the police to report any family member missing, and it takes them so much time to arrive. And it makes no sense for them to take 45 minutes to get to the Gosch's home because they lived within a few blocks from a police station. It was, I believe, 10 blocks away. It just makes absolutely no sense that it took them almost an hour for them to get to their house. So anyway, as valuable time was wasted by the police, they finally arrived to the Gosch's home around 9:15 a.m. Noreen, Johnny's mother, didn't waste any time on her end. She had already contacted everyone she could that saw Johnny that morning. She contacted all of the families with the newspaper boys, and she talked to them. And of course, she had mostly talked to younger boys, all the paper boys that morning, and they told her everything about what happened that morning. They told her about this weird man that was asking for directions. They told her about how he did this weird U-turn and stopped right in front of the boys and was asking all these directions. They told her about, as soon as Johnny leaving, that he was flicking the dome lights on and off. They told her the entire story, and each of them told her either the exact same story or very, very similar. And so she already had everything written down, and she already had the best timeline that she could come up with for that morning regarding her son's disappearance. But as Noreen is trying to give all the cops all this information, she found they very quickly dismissed her. And they tried to dismiss the entire situation. They kept suggesting to both of Johnny's parents that, oh, well, maybe he just ran away. Or maybe he's at a friend's house and didn't tell anyone. Noreen actually recounted that one of the police officers even asked her, has Johnny ran away before? Just insinuating that Johnny was just some runaway kid that did this all the time when he's never done anything like this. That's just not who he was. All in all, this is such severely shitty police work in my opinion. Yes, all theories are wide open at this point and nothing can be ruled out. But when a child's parents are sitting there and they're telling you that one, their child is not and has never been a runaway, and that he's this very responsible kid, and this is extremely not like him. Two, Noreen has already talked to all the witnesses and describing this weird-ass man in a blue car that was apparently following Johnny. She had collected all of these statements, had everything written down, ready to give to the police, and they just dismissed her. She relayed this so many times to the police that she was certain that based on what she was told by all these boys, all the neighbors, that she believed her son had been kidnapped. Sadly, the police seemed to not want to listen to her. And then this part still makes my blood absolutely boil. The police, after talking to Johnny Gosch's parents, informed them that they would not classify their son a missing person until he has been gone a full 72 hours. That's 3 whole days of such valuable time. A lot of things were so different in the 80s regarding how these situations were handled. We are now very aware, everyone who, listens to true crime and does their research, now it's just common sense, honestly, that the first 24 hours are the most important. So please, God forbid someone goes through a similar situation like this, do not believe the bullshit in movies or in shows that you have to wait a full 24 hours. That is definitely no longer accurate. If you feel that something isn't right, contact them and report it immediately. The sooner a situation is reported, the better chance the missing person has. Johnny's parents were absolutely and rightfully horrified about this information that the police were not going to do anything until 72 hours had passed. It just seems like the police convinced themselves that Johnny Gosch was just another runaway kid, and that sooner or later he would just magically come back home. Then the police left, and they did not return for hours. Later, they did come back with a detective this time, and they interviewed the parents. And this interaction didn't go any better at all. His parents described what had happened again, and it was just so unhelpful because they would answer all of the detectives' questions, and the detective seemed to not even believe anything that they were telling them. This time, Noreen tried to give them recent photos of Johnny, and this is just so unbelievable. They actually refused to take the pictures. Why? I have no idea. Just what the hell were these people thinking? It was just so obvious that these people had never dealt with a missing persons case at all. I mean, even if Johnny was a runaway, what's the purpose of not taking any pictures to start making posters and spreading the word? There wasn't all this social media back then. There were only a couple of ways to spread out this information, mostly just posters and news outlets. That was about it. So the fact that the police just bluntly refused to take his photos, it just doesn't make any sense to me. They just refused to treat this as anything other than a runaway case. They did probably the most basic search of the neighborhood. They asked a few neighbors if they had seen Johnny that morning. It's just literally as if they didn't give a shit. And it was just so disrespectful to John and Noreen, who were at this point just so worried, frustrated with the police work. And I would too. I think I would have blown up and probably been arrested, honestly. I just would have blown up just knowing that the police were hardly putting any effort to my son's disappearance. It's just so sad. So with the police giving the bare minimum of help, the community and neighborhood was learning about Johnny Gosch being missing. All these neighbors knew Johnny. He was the Paperboy. They knew, oh, the Gosch Paperboy. They knew him, and they knew how he was, and they knew that he wouldn't just up and leave for no reason. They knew what a responsible young man he was. But Noreen and John didn't just sit down and take that loss that the police were giving them. They actually gathered as many people as they could that were willing to help, and they formed their own search party, desperately looking for Johnny. And incredibly, the police stopped the search party as they did not want an amateur search party involved. And that's just so ridiculous. And this is why there are just so many conspiracy theories regarding this case, because, just why not? Why put a stop to more people trying to search for this boy? When obviously they're not looking at this case as a kid that has been kidnapped. They are looking at this case as that he's just a runaway kid that will show back up when he's ready, basically. It just really feels like as if the police didn't even want Johnny to be found. They made it so easy for all these conspiracy theories to appear. After the search parties were abruptly stopped by the law enforcement, Noreen went to the police station herself and she demanded answers as to why their search was stopped. And she demanded that they call the FBI because they obviously didn't have any interest in finding her son. And they refused. They actually refused to call the FBI. So Noreen, who in my opinion such a badass woman, such a strong and determined individual, she calls the FBI herself. So obviously at this point, Noreen and John had no faith whatsoever with the law enforcement, and they no longer trusted them, which why would they? They have completely not done anything at this point. So when Noreen spoke with the FBI, they informed her that they would send someone out in a few days if their local law enforcement continues to not be helpful with the situation. Then 3 days later, a couple of FBI agents did arrive and visited John and Noreen's home. It's then that they informed Johnny's parents that their local law enforcement had refused their assistance regarding this case and that they would not be able to help due to their refusal. Unfortunately, local law enforcements technically do have full jurisdiction regarding cases, so they are entitled to refuse the assistance from the FBI if they choose to. And so the FBI agents left. Johnny's parents then reached out to the governor of Iowa and requested to use helicopters to help and aid to search for Johnny. But they were told that in order to be able to use these helicopters, they would have to pay themselves $800 per hour. And they didn't have that type of money. $800 was worth a lot more back then. And John and Noreen, they were upper middle class, but they still couldn't afford $800 an hour for these helicopters. So no one but really the neighborhood community had any interest in helping them or finding Johnny. Noreen reached out to so many law enforcement agencies regarding her missing son. She spread every piece of information she could. Then finally, the news outlets began to pick up this case, and soon enough, Johnny Gosch's face was all over the media. Back in the 80s, it was a little more rare for a specific case like this to be plastered all over the media in this way. But Johnny's did, and that was really good, because at least his name and his photo was being put out there. John and Noreen then began doing televised interviews about their search for Johnny, so that gave them more hope than they had in a while. And Noreen, because of how shitty the investigation was going, if you could even call it an investigation at this point, she began to document everything for her son's case. She wrote down everything, and she still has all of these documents to this investigation. She documented by date and time any tip, any relevant information, anything that came through those hotlines, she wrote down. And she did such an incredible job documenting everything about her son's case. And she would give all of these tips to the police, which of course felt like just a massive waste of time for her to do this, because the police just dismissed all of these tips and told her that they either weren't relevant or that these tips weren't just worth following up on. And I just can't get over the lack of police help during the beginning of this case. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It's just so ridiculous. It makes no sense at all, and it's so irritating. Weeks eventually turned into months. Johnny was classified as a runaway until he was gone for 4 months. At the 4-month mark, the police finally labeled Johnny Gosch's case as a kidnapping instead of a runaway. So now it's been 4 months since Johnny had disappeared. Police really didn't have any evidence whatsoever, because they weren't even looking for any type of kidnapping evidence, and they couldn't find, apparently in their minds, any type of motive for the crime either. Without these key factors at this point, in the police's eyes, this case quickly went cold. And I really don't understand that they couldn't figure out any type of motive, because, I mean, obviously, if someone's kidnapping a child, it's more than likely some sort of pedophilic reason, right? And no one wants to think about that, of course, but it's sadly there, and it's real. So I don't understand why they couldn't figure out any type of motive, but that's my opinion once again. John and Noreen's own investigation continued. They hired private investigators. They made their own posters. They appeared in several interviews. They did everything and anything possible for their son. And police were obviously just refusing to provide any type of resources for the Goschs, because John and Noreen had to get this composite sketch done by themselves. They had to hire their own sketch artist and go back and ask all of the witnesses to describe what the two men looked like. The man in the blue truck and the man that came out from between the houses were both very vocal about the police department's lack of usefulness to their son's case. And they stated multiple times how the police were not helping and how they were doing their investigation pretty much by themselves. And the police did not like that they were publicly demeaning them. They began specifically calling Noreen a loon, which it's just so unnecessary. You know, this is a grieving mother who's just trying to find her son, and they just want to start calling her names just because she was actually calling them out because of what a shitty job they were doing. It's just very upsetting to me. Around this time, Noreen and John also started up the Johnny Gosch Foundation, with their mission being to educate kids and adults about common tactics of kidnappers and sexual predators. Noreen specifically has become a very helpful advocate for this community and for these types of situations. She has helped so many families in the search for their kids. And I know there's been a lot of hate towards Noreen, really directly from the police enforcement and FBI, but what she has achieved in the years since Johnny has disappeared is nothing short but incredible. Very inspiring, to say the least. I have so much respect and admiration for Noreen and her work and her mission to help all of these families and to help prevent more kids from being kidnapped and taken and missing. So around this time, it was now 1983, there were still quite a few tips and sightings of Johnny Gosch. In March of 1983, a woman from Tulsa, Oklahoma said that while she was out, all of a sudden she saw a young boy screaming for help and trying to run away from apparently two men. This boy then ran up to this woman, begging her for help, and said, "Lady, please help me. My name is John David Gosch." And the woman was so stunned that this boy was pleading for help. I don't think she knew what to do. And then all of a sudden the two men then grabbed the boy's arm and they dragged him away. And the woman was very appalled by this incident that happened. She immediately went to the police. She reported this incident, and the police didn't take her seriously either. They assured the woman that this was probably just a family issue. It was just probably a boy that was mad at his parents and was just trying to get some sort of attention. That's just so stupid to me, that reasoning. That, oh, it was just a kid trying to get attention. It just doesn't make any sense. This incident is not confirmed 100% a true sighting of Johnny. It is, of course, possible that this woman could have just made up this entire story, wanted her 15 minutes of fame, saying that, oh yeah, I saw Johnny. You know, of course it could be something like that. But if this story was not made up, and this lady was telling the truth, maybe if the police had taken this tip seriously, then maybe Johnny would be back home safe right now, instead of still missing. So then a few months passed, and this woman, she did not forget about the boy that came up to her, begging for her help. She truly believed that this boy was in some sort of trouble, regardless that the police were just brushing the whole situation off. In the back of her mind, she remembered the name this boy had given her before he was dragged away by the men. One night, she was watching another abduction story on the news, and during this news story, Johnny's case was actually also mentioned, and then his picture appeared on the screen along with his name, and she immediately recognized the name Johnny Gosch. She instantly recognized the boy, and she was 100% certain that this was the same boy that ran up to her that day in Tulsa. After she saw his photo on this news story, she went back to the police, and she insisted that she did see Johnny Gosch those several months ago in Tulsa. And this time when she reported the sighting to the police, the information did get to John and Noreen. They were notified, and immediately they sent one of their private investigators to look further into the sighting. And after a couple of months investigating the sighting, they do believe that this sighting was in fact Johnny Gosch by January of 1984. Several more months then passed, and Johnny had been gone for almost 2 years. Then on August 12, 1984, another young paperboy had also disappeared with very, very similar circumstances as Johnny's disappearance. Eugene Wade Martin was a 13-year-old boy who also lived in Des Moines, Iowa. He also had an early morning paper route, just like Johnny. At roughly 5:30 in the morning during his route, a couple witnesses saw Eugene talking to a man, and no one really thought anything of it at the time. They just assumed that maybe this was just a boy talking to his father. But when more calls came in about how a few neighbors had not received their newspaper that morning, that's when it was discovered that Eugene was gone too. And just like Johnny, all that was found was a bundle of undelivered newspapers. For these two cases, there's definitely eerily similar things about these cases. They were both roughly the same age. They both obviously lived in Des Moines, Iowa. They were both seen talking to an unidentified man, and then minutes later after the interaction, both of them were just gone. So very, very similar circumstances here. And sadly, Eugene Martin has also still not been found. A reward of $94,000 was offered for any information on either of the two boys, but none of these tips ever led to Eugene or Johnny's safe return home. Around this time, Johnny's parents, Noreen and John, were receiving lots of threats and prank phone calls. Some of these people would tell Noreen and John to stop looking before they get hurt. They were starting to get threats now to stop their search for their son. Or in fact, they would get someone calling saying that, oh, they have Johnny and you need to give them $10,000 for his return. Just horrible things like that. They would just keep getting phone calls like that, and it was just awful. It's just so disgusting that on top of a mother and father desperately just trying to search for their son, they just had to go through such harassment and abuse by just sick people who were obviously just looking for attention. About a month after Eugene disappeared, Johnny and Eugene became one of the first missing kids to appear on milk cartons, along with Eaton Pats. Also in the same year, the Iowa registration passed the Johnny Gosch bill into law. This mandated that police must immediately respond and take action in cases of missing children. So thankfully, at the very least, the, oh well, you just have to wait 72 hours before we can do anything bullshit was officially out the window. Today, most, if not all, the states in the United States have adapted to similar laws. In July of 1985, another very strange occurrence happened relating to Johnny Gosch's case. A woman located in Sioux City, Iowa, was shopping at her local grocery store. After she paid for her groceries, the woman noticed something very weird about one of the dollar bills that she had received in change. On this dollar bill, there was a message on it, and it was written in ink. This message read, "I am alive, Johnny Gosch," and Johnny Gosch's name was written in signature. The woman, of course, took this dollar bill and gave it to the police, and the dollar bill has been labeled as key evidence for this case. Noreen and John took this dollar bill and had a handwriting analysis study the dollar bill very carefully, and these experts did conclude that this was Johnny Gosch's true signature. And they based this on real comparisons with Johnny's signature, so they were identical. And that's just absolutely crazy, in my opinion. Johnny was super smart doing this. And although this bill was produced in 1974, it wasn't able to give the police any type of timeline, but it at the very least gave his parents, Noreen and John, and the rest of the world hope that he could still be out there alive and that he could possibly still be found. And then another tragedy struck Des Moines, Iowa. Once again, another young boy vanished. On March 29th, 1986, Mark James Warren Allen, also 13 years old, it was the day right before Easter when Mark told his mother, Nancy Allen, that he was going to go to a neighbor's house down the street. His mother had just ordered pizza for the other kids, and right before Mark left, the last thing he told his mother was to save him some pizza as he would be hungry when he came home. That's when he walked out the door. He started down the street. He waved to his mother. She waved back to him through the window, just as he began to be out of sight from the bushes. But Mark never came back home. When Nancy reported her son missing, when he didn't come back, just unbelievably, the police officer informed her that they couldn't deem her son missing until a full 48 hours had passed. And Johnny Gosch's bill had already been law at that point, so she was livid. And she later states that she believed that the officer said this to her because they just didn't want to admit that another boy was taken, just like Johnny and Eugene had before him. And although Mark Allen's disappearance doesn't have the obvious similar circumstances as Johnny and Eugene's, but they still had main similarities. They were all young boys, 12, 13 years old, so roughly the same age. They all disappeared in Des Moines, Iowa. All three of them look relatively the same. They have the same brown hair, same race, but yet police never decided that there was any true connection between the three missing boys. And that really just makes me want to pull my hair out. That the police couldn't tell that these were very similar circumstances. They couldn't admit that to the public, which doesn't, again, everything about this case, the investigation's point of view, it doesn't make any sense what the police were doing. It's just so frustrating. It really, truly is. If I was any one of these parents, I think I would still be in jail because I think I would have just completely flipped out on these officers and how they treating the investigation that's regarding their children. It's sick to me. It's truly appalling that they did not want to believe that these cases of these three boys, of Johnny, Eugene, and Mark, that they could possibly be connected. But I will go ahead and stop here for part 1. In part 2, we will go through the rest of the timeline until present day, and we will go over the popular theories of Johnny Gosch's case and my opinion on what I think is the most likely scenario of what happened to him. Please go ahead and comment, share, subscribe to the channel, follow my social media profiles. Links are, of course, in the description below. I will get part 2 up in the next couple of days, so stay tuned for the conclusion of this case, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thank you all again for your support and your patience with me, and if you don't want to miss part 2 when it comes out, please go ahead and click the notifications bell. It will be coming out very shortly. I will not make you guys wait too long. But until then, bye guys.